At approximately 8:30 p.m. on the 30th of May 1998, a tornado touched down at the southern edge of Spencer, South Dakota. It was a small town of roughly 320 people, a farming community in the southeastern part of the state. The storm had been building all afternoon. The National Weather Service in Sioux Falls had issued a severe thunderstorm warning at 5:43 p.m., then upgraded it to a tornado warning at 8:15 p.m. The warning was specific. A large and extremely dangerous tornado was on the ground near the town of Emery, moving northeast towards Spencer. The storm track was clear. The threat was real. At 8:18 p.m., the tornado warning was extended. The storm was producing a rain-wrapped tornado that was difficult to see visually. Spencer was in its path. The town had a tornado siren mounted on a pole near the fire station. It could only be activated manually by turning a key at the fire station or by a remote switch in the city's emergency management office. The siren was never activated that evening. At 8:30, the tornado struck Spencer. It was rated an F4 on the Fujita scale, with winds estimated between 200 and 260 miles per hour. The tornado was half a mile wide. It destroyed nearly every structure in town: homes, businesses, the grain elevator, the church, the school. 6 people were killed. At least 150 were injured. The town was left in ruins. What happened? The question is not just about meteorology. It is about communication, decision-making, and the gap between a warning and a response. The National Weather Service did its job. The forecast was accurate, the warning was timely, but the warning did not reach the people of Spencer in a way that moved them to shelter. The town's siren was not sounded. Why not? The answer involves a series of judgments and missed signals that began hours earlier. The storm system that spawned the Spencer tornado was part of a larger outbreak across the northern plains. That afternoon, the Storm Prediction Center had issued a moderate risk of severe thunderstorms, later upgraded to a high risk. The conditions were textbook for violent tornadoes: strong wind shear, high instability, and a dry line pushing east. By late afternoon, supercells were forming across eastern South Dakota. One of them, a particularly intense storm near the town of Emery, began to rotate rapidly. At 8:15 p.m., the National Weather Service issued the tornado warning. The warning text stated that a confirmed tornado was on the ground. It was a warning that should have triggered immediate action. In Spencer, the person responsible for activating the siren was the town's emergency management director, who also worked at the local grain elevator. He was monitoring the storm on a weather radio. When the warning came in, he was at the grain elevator, not at the fire station. He later stated that he did not hear the warning because he was distracted by the noise of the machinery. He also said he did not see the tornado. The tornado was rain-wrapped, meaning it was hidden inside a curtain of heavy rain. Without visual confirmation, he hesitated. The siren remained silent. The result was that many residents had no warning that a tornado was bearing down on them. Some saw the sky turn green and took shelter on their own. Others heard the storm approaching, the roar like a freight train, and dove into basements or bathtubs, but many were caught unaware. The tornado struck with little notice. Houses were lifted off their foundations and slammed into the ground. Cars were thrown like toys. The grain elevator, a towering structure that was the town's landmark, collapsed. The school was heavily damaged, but it was empty because the school year had ended. That may have saved dozens of lives. The church was destroyed. The local bar where some residents had gathered was flattened. 6 people died. Among them were a mother and her infant child, killed when their home collapsed. Another victim was an elderly man who had returned to his house to retrieve his dog. The dog survived, he did not. The aftermath of the Spencer tornado is a study in both devastation and resilience. In the days that followed, the town was declared a disaster area. The Federal Emergency Management Agency arrived. The National Guard set up a field hospital. Volunteers from surrounding communities poured in to help with search and recovery. The town was eventually rebuilt, but it was never quite the same. The population declined. Some families moved away, unable to face the memory. Others stayed and rebuilt, determined to restore their community. A new grain elevator was constructed, a new school was built. The tornado became part of the town's identity, a marker of before and after. But the deeper question remains, how could this have happened? How could a town with a tornado siren in the middle of Tornado Alley, with a warning issued 15 minutes before impact, fail to alert its citizens? The answer lies in the fragility of the warning system. In many small towns, the siren is activated by a volunteer or a part-time employee, often someone with other responsibilities. The decision to activate the siren is subjective. Some officials are reluctant to sound the siren unless they personally see a tornado, fearing that false alarms will cause the public to ignore future warnings. In Spencer, the emergency management director later admitted that he wished he had sounded the siren earlier, even without visual confirmation. But by the time he realized the danger, it was too late. The National Weather Service reviewed the event and concluded that the warning process was correct. The issue was not with the forecast, but with the human response at the local level. In the years after Spencer, the National Weather Service worked to improve the way warnings are communicated, emphasizing that a tornado warning should be treated as an immediate threat, even without visual confirmation. Siren activation policies were reviewed. Some towns adopted automatic siren activation protocols, triggered by National Weather Service warnings. Others required a two-person decision to avoid hesitation. But in 1998, those changes had not yet been made. Spencer is not an isolated case. Across the United States, the warning system for tornadoes has long been a patchwork of federal forecasts, local sirens, and individual judgment. The technology has improved dramatically. Doppler radar can now detect rotation in storms minutes before a tornado forms. Storm spotters provide ground truth. But the final link in the chain is the person who decides to push the button. In Spencer, that link broke. The 6 people who died that night were not victims of an unpredictable act of nature. The tornado itself was a violent natural event, but it was not unpredictable. The storm was forecast, the warning was issued. The failure was in the last mile of the warning system, the moment when information must become action. That failure has been studied and debated ever since. Meteorologists, emergency managers, and town officials have looked at Spencer as a cautionary tale about the importance of immediate response, the danger of waiting for visual confirmation, and the need for redundant warning methods. The town now has multiple sirens, and the policy was changed so that any tornado warning from the National Weather Service automatically triggers the siren. But those changes came after lives were lost. The story of the Spencer tornado is not just about what went wrong. It is also about the people who lived through it. Survivors tell of neighbors pulling each other from the rubble, of strangers driving for hours to help, of a community that refused to be destroyed. One resident recalled that after the tornado, the first thing she saw was the sky because her roof was gone. She crawled out of her basement and walked through the debris, calling for her children. She found them safe, huddled in a closet. Another survivor, a farmer, lost his house and his barns but found his livestock alive, scattered across the fields. He said that the recovery was harder than the storm. The investigation into the event did not stop at the siren policy. The National Weather Service also examined the radar data and the storm structure. The tornado that struck Spencer was a classic cyclic supercell, producing multiple tornadoes over the course of a few hours. The one that hit Spencer was the most powerful. It was on the ground for approximately 15 miles, cutting a path of near-total destruction through the heart of the town. The damage survey found evidence of extreme wind speeds. Vehicles were thrown several hundred yards, trees were debarked, and homes were swept clean off their foundations. The F4 rating was a confirmation of the storm's intensity, but for the residents the rating was irrelevant. What mattered was what they had lost. In the years since, the Spencer tornado has been cited in emergency management training as a case study in warning response. It appears in textbooks and FEMA courses. It is a reminder that a warning is only effective if it is heard and acted upon. The technology is only as good as the people using it, and the people using it must be willing to act quickly even when uncertainty exists. The event still matters because the same vulnerabilities exist today. While many towns have automated sirens, others still rely on manual activation, whether radios are not universally owned or always turned on. Cell phone alerts can reach millions, but in 1998 that technology did not exist. Even today, not all alerts are received in time, especially in rural areas with limited cell coverage. The human element remains the variable. At 8:30 p.m. on the 30th of May 1998, the town of Spencer, South Dakota was erased from the map in a matter of minutes. The tornado did not discriminate. It took the old and the young, the rich and the poor, the cautious and the unprepared. It left behind a landscape of splintered wood, twisted metal, and broken lives. But it also left behind a lesson. That lesson is not just about sirens or radar or weather. It is about the chain of communication and the people at every link. It is about the gap between a warning and a response, and how that gap can be the difference between life and death. This is the story of the Spencer tornado. In the segments that follow, we will trace the timeline hour by hour, examine the decisions made and not made, and hear from the survivors and the responders. We will look at what systems failed, what lessons were learned, and how the town rebuilt. We will ask the questions that still haunt those who were there, and we will try to understand how a storm that was forecast, warned, and tracked could still take so much. The first step is to go back to that afternoon, when the sky began to turn and the storm began to form. At 7:15 p.m. on the 30th of May 1998, the National Weather Service office in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, began issuing severe thunderstorm warnings for a cluster of storms moving across the southeastern part of the state. The atmosphere was primed for violent weather. A cold front was pushing into warm, humid air. The wind shear was extreme speed and directional changes that favor rotating updrafts. Meteorologists at the Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma, had already placed the region under a moderate risk of severe storms earlier that day. By late afternoon, they upgraded parts of the area to a high risk. The ingredients were in place for a tornado outbreak. What happened next was not a surprise to the forecasters. At 7:40 p.m., the first tornado warning was issued for parts of Minor County. A supercell thunderstorm had developed near the town of Howard. It was moving northeast at about 35 miles per hour. Doppler radar showed a hook echo, the classic signature of rotation within a storm. Storm spotters reported a funnel cloud. The warning went out over NOAA weather radio and through local media. In Howard, the tornado sirens sounded. People took cover. The storm passed without a touchdown in that area, but the supercell was not finished. It continued to evolve, cycling through stages of organization. Meteorologists watched the radar screens as the storm approached the town of Spencer. Spencer, South Dakota, sits in McCook County, roughly 40 miles west of Sioux Falls. In 1998, it had a population of about 300 people. The town was small, tightly knit, and quiet. It had one grocery store, one grain elevator, a couple of churches, and a school. The main street ran east to west. Most of the homes were wood frame houses built in the early 20th century. The town was not wealthy, but it was stable. People knew their neighbors. The tornado siren was located on a pole near the center of town. It was activated by a manual switch at the fire station. The emergency management director for the county was a man named Dwayne Sattler. He was also the town's volunteer fire chief. On that evening, he was monitoring the weather reports. At 8:10 p.m., the National Weather Service issued a severe thunderstorm warning for McCook County. The storm was producing large hail and strong winds. At 8:15 p.m., the rotation in the storm intensified. Meteorologists in Sioux Falls saw a prominent mesocyclone on radar. They issued a tornado warning at 8:17 p.m. The warning stated that a tornado was possible and that residents should seek shelter immediately. The warning was broadcast on NOAA weather radio. It was also sent to local law enforcement and emergency management officials. In Spencer, Dwayne Sattler heard the warning. He looked at the sky. He saw clouds but no funnel. He later said that he wanted to be sure before sounding the siren. False alarms, he believed, would make people complacent. He waited. The storm continued to approach. At 8:22 p.m., a spotter 10 miles southwest of Spencer reported a tornado on the ground. The National Weather Service updated the warning. The tornado was moving northeast at 35 miles per hour. It was heading directly towards Spencer. The warning reached the county sheriff's office. Deputies began driving through the area with lights and sirens. In Spencer, the fire station received the update. Dwayne Sattler was still hesitant. He later said he wanted visual confirmation. At 8:25 p.m., he stepped outside again. The sky was dark, turning green. The wind had picked up. Hail began to fall, some stones the size of golf balls. He could hear the roar. He looked to the southwest and saw the tornado, a massive wedge shape illuminated by lightning. It was less than 2 miles away. Sattler ran to the fire station. He flipped the switch to activate the siren. At 8:27 p.m., the siren began to wail, but it was too late. The tornado was already at the edge of town. Many residents heard the siren only seconds before the power went out. Others never heard it at all. The wind was too loud, the hail too heavy, the roar of the tornado already drowning out everything else. The warning had been issued at 8:17 p.m. The siren did not sound until 10 minutes later. In that 10-minute window, the tornado advanced from beyond the horizon to the streets of Spencer. The residents who might have taken cover were instead still waiting, still unsure, still watching the sky. The tornado struck the western side of Spencer first. It hit the grain elevator. The structure, built of reinforced concrete and steel, was torn apart. The top of the elevator collapsed. Thousands of bushels of corn were scattered across the fields. The tornado then moved into the residential neighborhood. The first house it struck was a 2-story farmhouse. It was lifted off its foundation and thrown into the next lot. The family inside had been in the basement. They survived. The next house was not as lucky. The elderly couple living there had not made it to the basement. They were found in the living room, killed by debris. The tornado cut a path through the center of town. It destroyed the grocery store, the post office, and the church. It tore the roof off the school. The gymnasium collapsed. The fire station lost its bay doors. The tornado then turned slightly and hit the eastern side of town. It flattened a row of new homes that had been built just a few years earlier. In one of those homes, a young mother and her 2 children were in the basement. The house above them was swept away. They survived, but the mother suffered a broken arm and a deep cut on her forehead. Her children were unharmed. In another home, a man had tied his wife to the water pipe in the basement to keep her from being blown away. The pipe held. Both of them lived. The tornado left Spencer at 8:32 p.m. It had been on the ground for roughly 12 minutes. In that time, it had destroyed more than half of the town's buildings. The damage survey later classified it as an F4 tornado, with winds estimated between 207 and 260 miles per hour. The path was a quarter-mile wide. The tornado continued to the northeast, damaging a few farmsteads before dissipating in the open countryside. In Spencer, the immediate aftermath was chaos. The sirens had stopped, the power was out, the phone lines were down, the roads were blocked by debris. People emerged from their basements to find a world they did not recognize. The landmarks were gone. The street signs were gone. The houses they had lived in for decades were piles of splintered wood and shattered glass. The first responders arrived within minutes. The county sheriff's department, the fire departments from neighboring towns, and the South Dakota Highway Patrol all converged on Spencer. They brought chainsaws, search dogs, and medical supplies. They began working through the rubble looking for survivors. The search was methodical. Every pile of debris was checked. Every basement was inspected. The bodies of the victims were found one by one. In the home of the elderly woman, rescuers found her body beneath a collapsed wall. Her dog was alive, sitting beside her. Another victim was a man who had been in his garage when the tornado hit. The garage disintegrated. He was thrown into a field and died of internal injuries. The sixth victim was a woman who had been driving into town when the tornado crossed the road. Her car was rolled several times. She was thrown from the vehicle and died on the roadside. The six victims were not many compared to the scale of destruction, but in a town of 300, every death was a profound loss. The town mourned. Funerals were held in the following days. The survivors grappled with grief and shock. Many spoke of the deafening noise, the feeling of being trapped, the helplessness of watching their homes crumble. Some described the tornado as a living thing, a black beast that devoured everything in its path. Others remembered the silence after it passed, the eerie stillness, the sound of wind replaced by the sound of crying and the crackling of broken wood. Investigators from the National Weather Service arrived the next morning. They surveyed the damage and interviewed survivors. They reviewed the radar data and the warning timeline. They concluded that the tornado warning was issued in a timely manner and that the forecast was accurate. The failure was in the activation of the siren. The emergency management director waited for visual confirmation, which cost precious minutes. The investigators noted that the siren was not tested regularly. They also noted that the town lacked an emergency operations plan. There was no designated shelter. There was no backup communication system. The only siren was in the center of town, and it was activated by a single switch. If that switch was not thrown in time, the warning was useless. The investigators also discovered that the storm spotter who reported the tornado at 8:22 p.m. was not in direct contact with the town. The spotter's report went to the National Weather Service, which then relayed it to the county sheriff. The sheriff's office then called the fire station. By the time the information reached Dwayne Sattler, the tornado was already close. The chain of communication had too many links. In a situation where every second counts, the delay was fatal. After the investigation, the National Weather Service implemented changes. They encouraged local emergency managers to use National Weather Service warnings as automatic triggers for siren activation. They emphasized that waiting for visual confirmation was too dangerous. They also worked to improve the spotter network and the speed of communication. In Spencer, the town council voted to install a new siren system with multiple sirens that could be activated remotely. They also created a formal emergency plan with designated shelters and trained volunteers. But those changes came after the 6 lives were lost. The deeper question, the one that continues to bother meteorologists and emergency managers, is why do people wait? Why do they hesitate to sound the alarm? The answer often lies in the fear of false alarms. Every time a siren sounds and no tornado occurs, the public becomes a little less likely to respond the next time. This is known as the cry wolf effect. Emergency managers are trained to weigh the consequences of false alarms against the consequences of a missed warning. In Spencer, the fear of a false alarm led to a fatal delay. But the irony is that the public in Spencer had not experienced many false alarms. The town had never had a direct hit from a tornado before. The siren had been used only a few times in recent years, mostly for severe thunderstorms. The reluctance was not based on past failures. It was based on a cultural expectation that you should not sound the siren unless you are certain. Certainty in a tornado warning is a luxury that does not exist. By the time you are certain, it is often too late. The Spencer tornado remains a case study because it illustrates the gap between technology and human behavior. The radar was advanced enough to detect the rotation. The warning was issued. The forecast was correct. But the final link in the chain, a human being making a decision under pressure, failed. That failure was not malicious, it was understandable, but it was fatal. In the years since 1998, the National Weather Service has shifted its philosophy. They now stress that a tornado warning should be treated as an immediate threat, not a suggestion. They use polygon warnings, which map the specific area at risk, rather than county-wide warnings. They also emphasize the importance of having multiple ways to receive warnings, including cell phone alerts, weather radios, and social media. In Spencer, the town now has a new siren system that is activated automatically by the National Weather Service warning. No human decision is required. The system is designed to prevent the hesitation that cost 6 lives, but even with technology, the human element remains. Not everyone has a weather radio. Not everyone has a cell phone. Not everyone listens to the sirens. The tornado in Spencer is a reminder that warnings are only effective if people hear them and believe them. And people naturally want proof. The challenge for meteorologists and emergency managers is to bridge the gap between the certainty of the data and the uncertainty of the human mind. The survivors of Spencer carry that lesson with them. Many still live in the town in homes that were rebuilt after the tornado. They remember the sound of the wind and the sight of the sky where their roof used to be. They remember the smell of wet wood and the feel of glass under their feet. They remember the kindness of strangers who came to help, the sound of chainsaws all night, the sight of volunteers sorting through debris for photographs and keepsakes. And they remember the dead, the elderly woman, the man who went back for his dog, the young mother who was driving home from work. The tornado did not end Spencer. The town still exists. The population is smaller, but the community is still there. The grain elevator was rebuilt. The school was replaced. The church was restored. The town holds an annual Tornado Remembrance Day. They gather at the memorial, a small plaza with a fountain and a plaque listing the names of the 6 victims. They talk about the storm. They talk about what they learned. They talk about the importance of acting quickly, of trusting the warnings, of not waiting for proof. The Spencer tornado is not the deadliest in history. It is not the most powerful, but it is one of the most instructive. It shows how a system that works can still fail because of a single human moment. It shows that the margin between safety and disaster can be measured in seconds. And it shows that, in the end, preparedness is not about technology alone. It is about the willingness to act without hesitation, to sound the alarm even before you see the storm, to err on the side of life. At 7:45 p.m. on the evening of May 30th, 1998, the National Weather Service office in Sioux Falls issued a severe thunderstorm watch for southeastern South Dakota. The watch covered a wide area, including the small town of Spencer. Meteorologists had been tracking a developing cluster of storms along a dry line that afternoon. The atmosphere was unstable. Hot, humid air from the Gulf of Mexico clashed with cooler air from the Rockies. The wind shear was extreme. Low-level rotation was already showing on radar. These were ingredients for a tornado outbreak, though no one knew exactly where the first funnel would touch down. By 8 p.m., the watch was upgraded to a warning for specific counties. The rotation had tightened. The radar signature showed a classic hook echo forming near the town of Salem, about 20 miles west of Spencer. The storm was moving east-northeast at 35 miles per hour. That meant it would reach Spencer in roughly 30 minutes. The National Weather Service issued the first tornado warning for McCook County at 8:10 p.m. It was a polygon warning, but in 1998, polygon warnings were not yet widely used. The warning covered the entire county, including Spencer. The text of the warning read, "A tornado has been reported near Salem moving east at 35 miles per hour. Seek shelter immediately." The warning was received by the county sheriff's office, the local fire department, and the emergency management director. It was also broadcast on NOAA weather radio. Weather radios were not common in Spencer. Most households relied on television or the siren. Television stations picked up the warning and broadcast it on their regular programming. However, the local cable system did not carry the station that first broke the news. Some residents later said they heard the warning on a radio station from Sioux Falls. Others said they simply did not hear anything until the power went out. At 8:15 p.m., the storm reached the outskirts of Spencer. The rotation intensified. The radar showed a debris ball, a telltale sign that the tornado was on the ground and lofting heavy objects. The National Weather Service issued a new warning at 8:18 p.m., this time with a more urgent tone. It stated that a confirmed tornado was on the ground moving through McCook County and approaching Spencer. The warning included the phrase, "Take cover now." But the siren in Spencer had still not sounded. The emergency management director, Dwayne Sattler, was at his home when he heard the initial warning. He drove to the fire station, which was the location of the siren control. The drive took about 5 minutes. When he arrived, he stepped out of his truck and looked toward the western sky. He saw the tornado. It was large and black, stretching from cloud to ground. He later told investigators that he waited a few seconds to confirm that it was indeed a tornado and not a power flash or rain shaft. That confirmation cost precious time. He ran inside the fire station and threw the switch. The siren began to wail at approximately 8:21 p.m. The tornado struck the grain elevator at 8:22 p.m. The delay between the first warning and the siren activation was 11 minutes. But the critical delay was not from the first warning. The critical delay was from the moment Sattler arrived at the fire station to the moment he sounded the siren. That interval was measured in seconds, not minutes. But those seconds were the difference between hearing the siren and not hearing it. Many residents later said they never heard the siren. Some said they heard it only after the tornado had already passed. Others heard it as they were running to their basements. The sound of the siren was overwhelmed by the roar of the tornado. What made the Spencer tornado particularly dangerous was its sudden intensification. The storm had been producing a weak tornado earlier near Salem, but as it approached the town, it rapidly strengthened. The damage path showed a narrow swath of F2 damage at the beginning, then a wider swath of F3 and F4 damage through the center of town. The funnel widened to nearly half a mile. The wind speeds were estimated at 200 to 220 miles per hour. It was not the strongest tornado ever recorded, but for a small town with no shelter plan, it was enough. The National Weather Service survey team documented the damage in detail the next day. They found that the first structure hit was the grain elevator on the west edge of town. The elevator was a reinforced concrete structure, but the tornado tore off its roof and collapsed one wall. The debris from the elevator was carried eastward, adding to the destructive force of the storm. The next structures were houses on the western residential streets. Many were completely removed from their foundations. The survey team noted that some homes had been swept clean with only the concrete basement left. Others had been twisted on their foundations. The pattern of damage indicated that the tornado was at its maximum intensity as it passed through the center of town. One of the most significant findings was the lack of a designated shelter. The town had no public storm shelter. The only refuge available was basements in private homes, but not every home had a basement. Some houses were built on slabs. Those residents had no protection except a bathroom or closet. The survey team also noted that many of the fatalities occurred in homes without basements. The 6 victims were all found in structures that were either completely destroyed or rolled over. The elderly woman who died in her house had no basement. The man who went back for his dog had a basement but did not make it. The young mother driving home was in a car, the most dangerous place to be during a tornado. The investigation also focused on the communication chain. The spotter who reported the tornado at 8:22 p.m. was a trained storm spotter located near the town of Farmer, about 10 miles west of Spencer. He radioed the report to the National Weather Service in Sioux Falls. The National Weather Service then called the McCook County Sheriff's Office. The Sheriff's Office then called the Spencer Fire Station. That call came in at 8:23 p.m., but by that time the tornado had already struck. The fire station was without power and the call was answered on a cell phone. The chain of communication had too many links and each link added a delay. But the deeper failure was not just communication. It was the lack of a pre-planned response. The town had no emergency operations plan. There was no designated person responsible for activating the siren. There was no backup method for sounding the alarm if the primary person was unavailable. The fire chief later stated that the activation protocol was informal. The siren was controlled by a switch at the fire station, and it was typically activated only when someone saw a tornado. This reliance on visual confirmation was the standard practice in many small towns at the time. The National Weather Service had been encouraging a shift to automatic activation based on warnings, but that change had not yet been implemented in Spencer. The cost of that delay was measured in lives. But the cost was also measured in property. The tornado destroyed 90% of the town. The total damage was estimated at $15 million. That amount, while significant, does not capture the loss of community infrastructure, the displacement of families, the psychological trauma. The tornado stripped the town of its landmarks, its grocery store, its church, its school. The survivors described walking through rubble and not knowing which street they were on. The grid of streets had been erased. The only recognizable features were the water towers that remained standing. In the weeks after the tornado, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, provided assistance. Temporary housing was set up. Volunteers from across the state helped with cleanup. The Red Cross set up a shelter in a neighboring town. The insurance adjusters came. Many residents decided not to rebuild. They moved away. The population of Spencer dropped from around 300 to just over 200 in the following years. Those who stayed faced the slow process of reconstruction. They had to rebuild not only their homes but their sense of security. The Spencer tornado became a case study in the failure of siren activation protocols. It was cited in training materials for emergency managers across the country. The National Weather Service used it to illustrate the importance of not waiting for confirmation. They emphasized that a tornado warning should trigger an immediate response. The concept of the tornado emergency was formalized in 1999, in part due to lessons from Spencer and other deadly outbreaks. A tornado emergency is a higher-level warning used when a confirmed violent tornado is about to strike a populated area. It is intended to cut through the hesitation and prompt immediate sheltering. But the question remains, why did the emergency manager wait? Sattler later said that he wanted to be sure. He did not want to sound a false alarm. He knew that a false alarm would cause people to ignore future warnings. This is the classic dilemma of the cry wolf effect. Research has shown that false alarms can reduce public response, but the cost of a missed warning is much higher. In a small town, a false alarm might inconvenience a few dozen people. A missed warning can kill. The challenge is that emergency managers are humans. They make decisions under stress with incomplete information. The technology was there, the data was clear, but the human brain, conditioned by years of cautious practice, hesitated. In the years after Spencer, the National Weather Service worked to reduce the false alarm rate itself. They improved radar algorithms, increased the number of storm spotters, and refined warning polygons. They also encouraged emergency managers to use the warning as a trigger, not a suggestion. Many towns installed automatic siren systems that could be activated remotely by the National Weather Service. By the early 2000s, the typical delay between a tornado warning and siren activation had shrunk from minutes to seconds, but the human element remains. Even today, some small towns still rely on a single person to throw a switch, and that person might hesitate. The Spencer tornado also highlighted the vulnerability of small, rural communities. These towns often lack the resources for multiple sirens, backup power, and trained personnel. They may have only one person responsible for emergency management, and that person may have other duties. In Spencer, the emergency management director was also a farmer. He was not trained in meteorology. He relied on his eyes. That is no longer acceptable in an age of advanced radar and instant communication. The survivors have their own lessons. Many of them now have weather radios. They know the sound of the siren. They have practiced their shelter plans. They have basements. But they also carry the memory of that night. They remember the color of the sky, a sickly green. They remember the feel of the pressure drop, the way their ears popped. They remember the sound of the train, as they describe it, the roar that kept getting louder. They remember the silence after, broken only by the cries of the injured and the hiss of broken gas lines. The memorial in Spencer is a simple plaza with a fountain and a plaque. Each year on the anniversary, the town gathers. They read the names of the 6 victims. They ring a bell 6 times. They tell stories. They remind each other to be ready. They also remind visitors that the system is only as strong as its weakest link. In 1998, that weak link was a moment of hesitation. It could happen again anywhere. The hope is that others have learned from Spencer. But the fear is that somewhere in some small town, another emergency manager is looking at the sky waiting to be certain. And the seconds are ticking. The seconds are ticking. In Spencer, they ran out. But the same hesitation that cost 6 lives in South Dakota has been repeated in other towns, other storms. The difference is that, after Spencer, the National Weather Service undertook a systematic effort to understand not just the meteorology, but the human decision-making that leads to a missed warning. They commissioned case studies that included interviews with every link in the communication chain. They found a pattern of what they called deferred action, the tendency to wait for multiple confirmations before acting. In Spencer, the first confirmation was the spotter's report. That should have been enough. But the emergency manager wanted to see it himself. He wanted to be certain. Certainty is a luxury that does not exist in severe weather. By the time you are certain, the storm is already on you. What happened that night is a story of a storm that formed with unusual speed. The atmosphere was primed for violent convection. A strong low-pressure system over the northern plains pulled warm, moist air northward from the Gulf of Mexico. At the same time, a fast-moving jet stream brought dry, cool air aloft. The combination created extreme instability. The convective available potential energy, or CAPE, in the region exceeded 3,000 joules per kilogram. That is a value typically associated with severe thunderstorms capable of producing violent tornadoes. The wind shear was also favorable. Deplayer shear, the change in wind speed and direction with height, was strong, and the storm relative helicity, a measure of the potential for rotation, was elevated. The ingredients were there for a classic supercell. At 7:30 p.m. that evening, the Storm Prediction Center had issued a tornado watch for southeastern South Dakota. The watch included McCook County. The Spencer Volunteer Fire Department was aware of the watch. They had a scanner. They monitored the weather radio. But the watch did not trigger a siren. That was standard. The siren was only for a tornado sighting. At 8 p.m., the National Weather Service in Sioux Falls issued a severe thunderstorm warning for a cell west of Spencer. The storm was moving east at 40 miles per hour. It was producing large hail. At 8:15 p.m., a spotter near Farmer reported a wall cloud. The wall cloud was rotating. That is a precursor to a tornado. At 8:18 p.m., the same spotter saw a funnel. He reported it. At 8:20 p.m., the funnel touched down. He reported that too. It took him 2 minutes to find a phone. He called the National Weather Service at 8:22 p.m. The National Weather Service meteorologist on duty that evening was Kenneth W. Ken Pickering. He received the report and immediately issued a tornado warning for McCook County. The warning was broadcast on NOAA weather radio at 8:23 p.m., but the tornado had already touched down. The warning was based on a confirmed sighting. That is the ideal scenario. Yet the warning did not reach the people of Spencer in time. The delay was not in the warning issue, it was in the activation of the outdoor siren. The siren was controlled by a switch at the fire station. The person who controlled that switch was the emergency management director, who was also a farmer. He was not at the fire station. He was at his farm a mile outside town. He heard the spotter's report on his scanner. He got in his truck and drove toward town. He wanted to see it for himself. He never did. The tornado had already struck. The siren never sounded, but even if it had, would it have made a difference? The tornado was on the ground for only a few minutes. It moved through the town in less than 3 minutes. The lead time from the first report to the strike was less than 5 minutes. That is a very narrow window, yet studies after the storm showed that some residents later said they heard the weather radio. One family had a weather radio in their basement. They heard the warning. They survived. Another family did not have a radio. They heard nothing. They lost 4 members. The difference between life and death was a $20 device. The tornado that struck Spencer was a classic multiple vortex tornado. It was a wedge over a quarter-mile wide. Its winds were estimated at 260 miles per hour, making it an F4 on the Fujita scale. The damage path was 7 miles long and up to 400 yards wide. The storm lifted just east of Spencer. In that path, it destroyed 135 homes, damaged 65 others, and killed 6 people. The dead were found in 3 locations, 3 in one home, 2 in another, 1 in a vehicle. The home with 3 fatalities collapsed on top of them. They were in a basement, but the house fell into the basement, crushing them. The home with 2 fatalities was a mobile home. Mobile homes offer almost no protection. The vehicle was a car that was thrown a quarter mile. The driver was a woman who had been driving home from work. She had a child in the car. The child survived, the woman did not. How could a town lose a third of its population in 3 minutes? The answer is not simply the storm, it is the sum of small failures. The siren was not activated. The emergency manager hesitated. The town had no pre-planned shelter. The homes were not built to withstand F4 winds. The residents did not have weather radios in every home. The roads were not clearly marked for emergency access. The volunteer fire department was undermanned. The communication chain was too long. All of these factors combined to create a situation where even a storm with 5 minutes of lead time could kill. In the aftermath, the National Weather Service's own survey team found that the siren in Spencer was not equipped with a backup power source. When the tornado knocked out power to the town, the siren would not have worked even if it had been activated. The siren had not been tested in months. The fire station itself was damaged. The fire chief, who survived by taking shelter in the station's basement, later said that he had never been trained on the siren's use. No one had ever told him that the siren should be activated automatically upon receiving a warning. The protocol was oral tradition, not a written procedure. These are the kinds of findings that changed how the National Weather Service approaches rural emergency management. After Spencer, they began a program to provide training to volunteer emergency managers in small towns. They requested applications for a grant program called Weather Ready Nation, which later became a framework for community preparedness. They also pushed for better siren technology. By 2002, many rural communities had installed self-activating sirens triggered by NOAA weather radio signals. The technology existed in 1998, it simply had not been adopted. The federal government also became involved. The National Institute of Standards and Technology conducted a study on the Spencer tornado as part of its investigation into the performance of buildings in extreme weather. They found that many homes in Spencer were built without anchor bolts connecting the wall frames to the foundation. In an F4 tornado, the entire house can lift off its foundation and roll. That is exactly what happened to several homes. The study recommended that all new construction in tornado-prone areas include anchor bolts and that basements be reinforced. Those recommendations were not mandatory, but they influenced building codes in some states. The emotional toll on the survivors was documented in a series of interviews by a University of South Dakota research team. They found that many residents experienced symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. The lack of warning was a significant factor. Survivors expressed anger at the county and state for not having better systems, but they also expressed guilt. Some said they should have known. They had always known that a tornado could come. They had just never believed it would. That disbelief is a common human response. It is the optimism bias that leads people to think that disaster will happen to someone else. In Spencer, it happened to them. In the years since, the town has rebuilt. A new siren was installed. It is activated automatically by the National Weather Service. The fire station now has a generator. The emergency management director is no longer a farmer. It is a trained position. There is a written plan. The school has a storm shelter, but many of the houses that were destroyed were never rebuilt. The town is smaller. The streets are wider. The empty lots are now overgrown with grass. The survivors who stayed say they are ready now. They know the sound of the new siren. They have a plan. They have a shelter. They have a weather radio. They also have the memory of the night when the siren did not sound. The Spencer tornado is often compared to other deadly tornadoes of the 1990s, such as the 1997 Jarrell, Texas tornado that killed 27 people and the 1999 Bridge Creekmore, Oklahoma tornado that killed 36. Those storms were stronger, they caused more deaths, but Spencer is different. It is a story of a small town that was failed by its own system. It is a story of a warning that arrived too late because someone hesitated. It is also a story of redemption. The town did not die, it is still there. But it is a testament to how fragile a community can be when everyone assumes that someone else will sound the alarm. The broader lesson is not just about sirens, it is about the culture of preparedness. In the United States, the responsibility for warning the public lies with local emergency managers. The National Weather Service provides the forecast and the warning. Local officials decide how to disseminate that warning. That decentralized system works well in large cities with dedicated offices. In small towns, the responsibility often falls on a volunteer who may have no training and no backup. That is still true today. For every Spencer that learned its lesson, there are hundreds of other small towns with a single unpaid emergency manager whose job is to farm or sell insurance until a storm comes. The industry has changed. The National Weather Service now issues storm-based warnings, not county-based warnings. That means the warning polygon is a smaller area, reducing the false alarm area. The number of false alarms has decreased, but the false alarm rate for tornado warnings is still around 70%. That means emergency managers still face the dilemma of sounding the siren or waiting. Many choose to sound it. Some still hesitate. The legacy of Spencer is that hesitation can kill. There is one more detail from the investigation that is often overlooked. Tornado that struck Spencer was not a surprise. The Storm Prediction Center had highlighted the region earlier that day. The National Weather Service had issued a severe thunderstorm watch. The spotter had reported the threatened days. The rotation was visible on radar. The warning was issued. But the warning did not reach the people because the siren was not activated and many homes did not have weather radios. The gap between the technology of detection and the technology of dissemination was fatal. That gap has narrowed, but it has not closed. In 1999, the National Weather Service launched the Advanced Weather Interactive Processing System, or AWIPS. It improved the speed at which warnings are generated and disseminated. In 2001, the government began funding the installation of NOAA weather radio transmitters in rural areas. By 2010, coverage reached 95% of the population. In 2012, the Wireless Emergency Alert System was launched, sending alerts to cell phones in warned areas. In 2016, the Emergency Alert System was updated to allow for more targeted messages. Each of these improvements can be traced back in part to the lessons of storms like Spencer. But the human link is still the weakest. The emergency manager who must decide to sound the alarm, the resident who must decide to take shelter, the driver who must decide to pull over. In Spencer, the emergency manager decided to wait, the residents decided to stay, the driver decided to keep driving. Those decisions cost lives. Technology exists to save them, but the technology is only as effective as the system that operates it. That system is made of people. The Spencer tornado killed 6 people, it destroyed a town, it changed the way the nation thinks about tornado warnings, but the tragedy is not only in the deaths, it is in the knowledge that those deaths could have been prevented. The warning existed, the technology existed, the siren existed, but the time between the first report and the decision to act was too long. That time is measured in seconds, and seconds when a tornado is moving at 40 miles per hour are the difference between shelter and death. Now, more than 2 decades later, the residents of Spencer still live with that knowledge. They have moved forward. They have rebuilt, they have new homes, new schools, new sirens, but the memory of that night is never far. The memorial fountain in the town square lists the names of the 6 who died. The survivors visit it every year. They remind themselves that the system is only as strong as its weakest link. They remind each other not to hesitate. What happened in Spencer is a cautionary tale that is still taught in emergency management courses. It is a case study in the failure of timing. It is a reminder that the most advanced radar in the world cannot help a community that does not have a way to hear the warning. It is a reminder that emergency plans are only useful if they are written down, tested, and rehearsed. It is a reminder that when a storm is coming, the only certainty is that waiting is not a strategy. The final lesson from Spencer is that the seconds before a tornado strikes are precious. In those seconds, a siren can sound. A door can be opened to a basement. A family can huddle together. In Spencer, those seconds were lost, but they do not have to be lost again. The town's legacy is a warning to every other small town. Do not wait until you see the tornado. By then, it is too late. On the morning of May 30th, 1998, the National Weather Service in Sioux Falls had already issued a severe thunderstorm watch for southeastern South Dakota. By 10 a.m., the Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma had flagged the region as having a moderate risk of severe weather. The ingredients were classic: warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico mixing with a dry line from the west. Instability indices were high. By noon, the first supercell thunderstorms began to develop over Nebraska and moved northeast toward the Missouri River. At 1:30 p.m., the National Weather Service issued a tornado watch for Turner County, including Spencer. That watch was in effect until 9 p.m. It did not mean a tornado was certain. It meant conditions were favorable. In Spencer, the emergency manager was a farmer named Roger. He had no formal training. He had a radio, a telephone, and a siren control box at the fire station. He was the only person authorized to sound the siren. That afternoon, he monitored the weather. He heard the watch. He knew what it meant. But he had sounded the siren twice in the previous month for false alarms. Each time, residents had complained. Each time, he second-guessed himself. At 4:30 p.m., the National Weather Service issued a severe thunderstorm warning for northern Turner County. The storm was producing large hail and strong winds. Roger heard the warning on his weather radio. He drove to the fire station. He waited. The storm was not yet producing a tornado. He decided to wait for a tornado warning. That decision would become the central point of the investigation. At 5:15 p.m., a train spotter northwest of Spencer reported a funnel cloud. That report was relayed to the National Weather Service. The office called Roger at the fire station. They said a funnel cloud was nearby and that the rotation was strengthening. Roger asked if they were issuing a tornado warning. They said not yet. The rotation had not touched down. Roger stayed by the siren control box. The phone rang again at 5:32 p.m. The spotter now reported a tornado on the ground. The National Weather Service immediately issued a tornado warning for Turner County. Roger received the warning seconds later. He looked at the siren control box. The motor that rotated the siren had failed. The siren would only produce a steady tone, not the standard rising and falling sound. He hesitated again. The siren did not sound. What happened next has been reconstructed from interviews and radar data. The tornado was moving southeast at approximately 40 miles per hour. It was a half-mile wide. The first homes struck were on the north edge of Spencer. At 5:38 p.m., the tornado entered the town. It crossed Main Street. It tore the roof off the grain elevator. It demolished the fire station. It collapsed the post office. It flipped cars and ripped trees from the ground. The residents who had no basement or storm shelter were caught in their homes. The 6 people who died were all in structures that were destroyed. The youngest victim was 2 years old. The oldest was 69. They had no chance to seek shelter because they had no warning. The National Transportation Safety Board does not investigate tornadoes. The National Weather Service issued an investigative report. The report noted that the siren was not sounded because the emergency manager had waited for confirmation. The report also noted that the siren motor had been known to fail in cold weather, but it was not tested routinely. The county had no written procedure for tornado warnings. The emergency manager had no backup. No one else in town knew how to activate the siren. The report concluded that the delay between the tornado warning and the siren activation was the primary cause of the casualties. The investigation also revealed a deeper systemic issue. The National Weather Service had issued the tornado warning at 5:32 p.m. The siren should have been sounded immediately, but the emergency manager was waiting for visual confirmation. He did not understand that a tornado warning is issued based on radar and spotter reports, not on a confirmed touchdown in your backyard. That misunderstanding was not unique to Spencer. It is a common gap in training for rural emergency managers. Many of them are volunteers. They are farmers, teachers, mechanics. They are not meteorologists. They are not communication specialists. They are good people who are asked to make life-or-death decisions with limited information. In the aftermath, the National Weather Service worked with the state of South Dakota to improve the warning system. They funded a program to install weather radios in every school and government building in the state. They required all county emergency managers to complete a standardized training course. The training emphasized the importance of sounding the siren immediately upon receipt of a tornado warning, not waiting for visual confirmation. The training also stressed that false alarms are acceptable because the cost of a false alarm is small compared to the cost of a missed warning. The siren in Spencer was replaced with a new electronic siren that could be activated remotely by the County Emergency Management Office. The new siren was tested every month. The fire station was rebuilt with a dedicated emergency operations center that had a generator, backup communications, and a direct line to the National Weather Service. The town also installed a small siren at the school, which was used for drills. The survivors who lost homes and businesses had to rebuild. The federal government provided disaster assistance, but the process was slow. Some residents moved away. Others stayed. The community held a memorial service on the 1-year anniversary. The 6 names were read aloud. A bell was rung for each name. The town built a fountain in the park. The fountain has 6 jets of water representing the 6 lives lost. It is a quiet place. The water flows year-round. The story of the Spencer tornado is still told in emergency management conferences. It is a case study in the failure of the human link. It is also a case study in how a small town can recover. The population of Spencer is now less than it was before the storm, but the town is still there. The grain elevator was rebuilt. The post office reopened. The school added a storm shelter. The fire station is staffed by volunteers who have all completed the state training. The siren is tested every first Tuesday of the month. When the test sounds, residents know what to do. They go to their basements. They wait. The sound is no longer just a test. It is a reminder of the night when the siren did not sound. The National Weather Service has continued to improve its technology. The radar systems used today are dual polarization, which can distinguish between rain, hail, and debris. The warning lead times have increased from an average of 12 minutes in 1998 to an average of 15 minutes today. The false alarm rate has dropped, but the challenge of reaching the public remains. Not everyone has a weather radio. Not everyone carries a cell phone. Not everyone lives in a town with a siren. In rural America, the most effective warning system is still a person who cares enough to knock on a neighbor's door. In Spencer, that person is now the mayor. He was a teenager when the tornado hit. He lost his grandfather. He remembers the silence after the storm. He remembers helping clean up. He remembers the anger. He also remembers the determination to rebuild. He now works with the county emergency manager to run drills. He speaks to schoolchildren about tornado safety. He tells them that the most important thing is to have a plan and to act on it. He tells them that waiting is not a strategy. The Spencer tornado did not change the world. It did not lead to a national law requiring sirens in every town, but it changed one town. It changed the way emergency managers think about the seconds between the warning and the action. Those seconds are now counted, they are practiced, they are drilled. And in Spencer, when the weather radio crackles with a tornado warning, the siren sounds within 30 seconds. It is automatic, there is no hesitation, there is no waiting, there is only the sound, and then the people go to the basements, and they wait, and they remember.